November 21st, 1902. The Laker Algonquin sailed through a patch of fog on Lake Superior, about 80 miles from Keweenaw Point, Michigan. The weather that afternoon was mild with light gusts and a haze. Just then, Captain James McMahon noticed another steamer off in the distance about 7 miles away. It was the grain carrier Bannockburn. The Bannockburn often shared the same course with the Algonquin, and Captain McMahon knew the steamer well. The Algonquin and the Bannockburn were some of the last vessels on the lakes, since the season was drawing to a close. Captain McMahon reported that the ship wasn't towing her barges. He thought it was because it would slow her down in rough weather. He noted the ship's sighting in the log, but when he took another look, the Bannockburn was nowhere to be seen. She simply vanished without a trace. It was long before the Bannockburn could have crossed the horizon that she disappeared. It would have been next to impossible for the ship to be there 1 minute and be gone the next minute. Aside from some debris that is claimed to be from the Bannockburn that washed ashore in places along Lake Superior, almost no trace of the ship was ever seen again. Her wreck has never been located, and she is often referred to as Flying Dutchman of the Great Lakes. Most of us think of ghost ship stories to be related to the Flying Dutchman, a ship that you often see in the distance that disappears in the blink of an eye, or ships like the Mary Celeste, where she was found adrift near the Azores with her crew missing. There have been numerous accounts of ships being found with their crew missing or adrift with no one on board. The Carol A. Deering in 1921, the Bachamo in 1931, which she was left adrift for 38 years, or the Copenhagen in 1928. But this also happens to ships of the Great Lakes. There have been numerous accounts of Great Lakes vessels disappearing without a trace or found with their crew missing. Here is one of those stories. Labeled hull number 386, the steel-hulled grain carrier Bannockburn was constructed at the Sir Railton Dixon & Company shipyard of Middlesbrough, England. She was launched on April 27, 1893. She was 254 feet, or 78 meters in length, and had a beam of 40 feet, or 12 meters, and came in at 1,620 gross registered tons. Several weeks later, the Bannockburn was complete and ready for operation. She arrived in Montreal on July 4, 1893, to join the Montreal Transportation Fleet. When there, her hull was shortened because, although she was the right size to fit through the locks on the Welland Ship Canal, she was too big to fit through the locks on the St. Lawrence Seaway. Her hull was shortened from 254 feet to 245 feet. On August 13th, she arrived in Kingston, Ontario, to be dry docked. A few weeks later, on September 9th, she left Kingston for her first trip on the Great Lakes, bound for Genesee, New York, to collect a load of coal. However, the next day, just before she arrived at Genesee, she ran aground about 10 miles from where she should have been. She left Genesee on September 11th, bound for Fort William, Ontario. Over the next 9 years, Bannockburn would make regular trips back and forth to ports on the lakes, carrying grain to the lower lakes and coal to the upper lakes. And the ship had no major incidents, with one exception. In October of 1897, the Bannockburn was heading from Chicago to Kingston with a load of grain when she struck the side of one of the locks in the Welland Canal. She sprung a leak and sank to the bottom of the lock. Fortunately, the ship was repaired and she was refloated soon after. But minus that small incident, there were very few accidents with the ship. She often towed 2 barges to various ports, and she was in fact one of the few lake freighters that would actually transit the Welland Canal and St. Lawrence Seaway, until November of 1902, when her successful career came to a mysterious demise. On November 20th, 1902, the Bannockburn, under the command of Captain George R. Wood of Port Dalhousie, Ontario, was loading grain at the Northern Canadian Grain Elevator in Port Arthur, Ontario. She was being loaded with 85,000 bushels of wheat bound for Midland, Ontario on Lake Huron. She finished loading that night and she pulled away from the dock and out into Lake Superior. However, the ship suffered a slight grounding just outside of the harbor, and her departure was delayed until the following day. Not much else is known about what happened to the ship until she was sighted by Captain McMaw of the Algonquin that evening. And although the ship disappeared right in front of McMaw's view, almost nothing was out of the ordinary. Later, the winds began to pick up, and the waves began to pound. Unfortunately, the seas began to worsen again. The winds were howling, and the waves began to tower. Luckily, the Algonquin arrived in port before the storm began to worsen. But the Algonquin was not the only vessel to report seeing the Bannockburn. The passenger steamer Huron was sailing to Port Arthur that evening when it started to snow. And one of the crew members had a chat with someone that reported seeing the lights of the Bannockburn in the storm. Soon after arriving in Port Arthur on the 25th of November, the Huron began another voyage to Sarnia, Ontario, where she arrived on the 28th of November. Meanwhile, the Bannockburn was extremely overdue at arriving at the Sioux Lock, but not many people were concerned since it wasn't uncommon for ships to arrive behind schedule at that time, especially in storms. And this was before Great Lakes ships were equipped with Marconi wireless. This delay seemed to be nothing out of the ordinary. And it wasn't until several days later when the Montreal Transportation Company was asked by the families of the crew if the ship was okay. Several days after the Bannockburn should have arrived at the Sioux Lock. It was unclear if the ship was missing or stranded. The Huron's engines were damaged in the storm. Some most thought that the Bannockburn either had an engine failure too, or she stopped somewhere to take shelter in the storm. After it was clear that the Bannockburn would never arrive at the Sioux Locks, a search was organized to look for the missing freighter, and theories were made to try to figure out what could have happened. On November 26, one of the managers of the Montreal Transportation Fleet received word that the Bannockburn was discovered, claiming that she was aground on Michipicoten Island in Lake Superior, and the crew was safe. However, a salvage tug known as the Favorite went to Michipicoten Island to investigate. The crew searched every inch of the island's shore, but found no sign of the Bannockburn or her crew. We don't know where the manager got the information, but it was probably fake. Many thought that Captain George Wood of the Bannockburn had been searching for the Caribou Island lighthouse, not knowing that the light had been turned off for the season. Another tug went to Caribou Island, but again, they found no trace of the Bannockburn. On November 25th, a debris field was discovered near Standard Rock Lighthouse by a passing freighter, but it's unclear if this debris field was from the Bannockburn. The only thing that was indeed confirmed to be from the ship was a life preserver found near Grand Marais, Michigan, on December 12th, with the ship's name on it. The Bannockburn was officially declared lost on November 30th, and almost nothing could determine what caused the Bannockburn's disappearance. There was just not enough information to prove or disprove the sightings and theories. Captain McMaw of the Algonquin had a theory that the ship suddenly disappeared because of a boiler explosion. But this would have been next to impossible since her hull was examined after she ran aground, and McMaw even said that he didn't hear or see any signs of an explosion. Over the years, the story of the Bannockburn began to fade into memory, and more famous shipwrecks on the Great Lakes occurred. As of this video, her wreck has never been found, and on stormy nights, sailors tell stories of ships fighting through storms, searching for the nearest lighthouse, which almost relates to the story of the Bannockburn. And she remains the Flying Dutchman of the Great Lakes.